Welcome to Let's Rewatch It Again. I'm Jordan, and I'm pretty sure my Spectre was with me the entire time. This week, we are rewatching a show that always gives me serious autumn vibes, Sabrina the Teenage Witch. No, not the Netflix one. This show starred Melissa Joan Hart as Sabrina Spellman in the 90s. Sabrina is a girl who discovers on her 16th birthday that she is a witch. As a novice witch, her spells often go awry. Her witch aunts, Hilda and Zelda Spellman, played by Carolina Rhea and Beth Broderick, respectively, counsel her on the proper use of magic and give her moral advice. Additionally, Hilda and Zelda must take care of Salem Saberhagen, voiced by Nick Bakay, a witch turned into a cat for trying to take over the world. The show's basic premise and general loopiness earned the show comparisons to the late 1960s television series Bewitched. And also, like Bewitched, all of our female witches have names that end with an A. This show is based on the Archie comics of the same name, but takes on its own personality and look. Our executive producer is Paula Hart, Melissa's own mother. Melissa's family often has cameos in her work, and her sisters frequently show up in Sabrina, especially her younger sister Emily, who plays her bratty and troublesome cousin Amanda. The show ran for 7 seasons, but here's a not so well kept secret. Only the first 5 seasons are really worth watching. Sabrina evolves quite a bit as a character, and I do believe her arc was affected by pop culture because she starts out as a cute but nerdy teen with a love for science and ends up as a journalist later in life. A little too Rory Gilmore for me, even though Sabrina came first. I find that that's a really big trend in late 90s, early 2000s shows, and even now that the main character ends up wanting to write or direct or do something in the field of creativity, but kind of leading towards Hollywood, LA, or New York City. And sometimes that's just a little bit difficult to relate to. I think it would have been way cooler if Sabrina had actually pursued the sciences and became a really cool scientist like her Aunt Zelda. I think that would have been a really interesting way to go, but we didn't do that. Sabrina was and still is a fashion icon from the 90s. I wanted her wardrobe and her hairstyles almost every single episode. All right, enough about all that. Let's get into the episode proper. Today, we are rewatching season 1, episode 23, The Crucible. Yes, just like the play. On a class field trip to Salem, the town, all the students at Westbridge High are told to act like townsfolk from the past, reenacting the Salem witch trials. When a jealous Libby sees Jenny speaking to her latest crush, she accuses Jenny of being a witch. Sabrina steps in to defend her, only to be accused of witchcraft herself. Hilda and Zelda insist that she solve the problem on her own, prompting Sabrina to discover an odd way of doing so. Our cold open is a really interesting way of showing us the two worlds that Sabrina lives in. A doorbell rings in her linen closet on the second floor. She opens it to discover a giant barbaric man who kind of looks like Jason Momoa, but like a 90s version. And he comes in with this giant steel weapon ready to annihilate her and discovers that he has the wrong address. And then we get this funny little quip that, well, our horde joined with another's and the communication has been horrible. He apologizes profusely, leaves his weapon on her bed, and starts to leave. And she's like, oh, wait, you left your thing. And she tosses it to him. And we only see from her perspective that she hits him, and we hear the thunk. She covers her face and says, sorry. Also, with our cold open, we had this strange moment where she is walking towards the camera with a giant bowl of Cheetos, trips, and the Cheetos explode onto the camera lens itself. I'm not really sure what that was about, but it's the 90s, you guys. After our title sequence, we go right into a classroom with an African American female teacher that we really don't see that often. It's very interesting that she's in this episode because we are talking about the othering of people. Oh, such a good choice, just saying. She reveals that they are going to Salem the next day and talks about the Salem witch trials and how terrible it was, then uses a very cheery non-segue into saying, well, the buses arrive tomorrow at 8 a.m. Let's go. In our classroom scene, we see that Sabrina and Harvey, her boyfriend, are sitting side by side. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, but Harvey was one of my first loves. I adored him. He was the first himbo that I really fell in love with. He's always super sweet. He's sporty, masculine, but always like really kind and just a little bit on the dumb side, but like a really gentle golden retriever. We then go into the hallway where Libby, our mean girl, is talking to her two best friends who very rarely get names. And I think we're going to find out at least one of their names later. But, these are just her lackeys. They're not that important. We don't really see them very much as characters. They're never going to have a plot line or anything other than are they with or against Libby in this moment. Libby's dress is actually really interesting today. She's wearing a kind of mod inspired 60s dress. It looks very psychedelic in this like blue, green, hot pink, lime green. It's so strange because most of the time we see Libby in more of a preppy mean girl type of look. Her two best friends are looking a little sportier than usual. And honestly, the three of them kind of remind me of Spice Girls. Like each of them has their own sense of style, but they all still look like they go together. Libby is discussing that she is not going to talk to her crush Adam until they reach the exotic location of Salem. Hysterical. This show is set in Massachusetts, by the way, in a town called Westbridge. And so I guess Salem does sound pretty exotic to them if you've never really been outside your town. One of her lackeys asks her if she's ever been with a baseball guy, and she names all these different sports of all the guys that she's dated. And she's like, oh, no, he's my first baseball guy. I also want to say in traditional 90s diversity, our three mean girls are one brunette, one blonde, and one African American girl. It was pretty normal for the 90s to have sets of three, and usually one of those three would be African American, possibly Latinx, but I mean, usually you had one diversity in the midst of just a whole land of white. I mean, it was even rare to see redheads in the 90s. Like, if you were a redhead, you were usually the main character, and there was a lot to be said about your red hair. I know that may not seem like a huge diversity when we talk about it in today's terms, but back then, having even a single African American character, let alone two in this episode, is kind of a lot, at least in the terms of 90s, where it is a white based show. Our next scene is at Sabrina's house, well, her aunt's house. They have a beautiful house that I've always been super jealous of. One of the things that I love about their house is they have tons of different types of furniture and relics from all generations, all eras, because Hilda and Zelda are supposed to be hundreds of years old. Like they literally talk about being a part of the Black Plague, medieval times, the Renaissance, the 60s, the 20s. Like they talk about it all. So we don't actually know their real ages at this moment in time. It always seems a little bit skewed, as if any time they were just most likely alive, because they even talk about being alive during Roman and Greek era or even Cleopatra. Crazy, just crazy. Sabrina comes in and says that she's sick and she can't go to Salem tomorrow, and she pretends to cough. And then Hilda calls her, are you an Indian mystic? And she's like, a what? And she says, a faker, a fake here, and then points. And it's important to note that Hilda's magical spells are usually a boom with lots of smoke. And all of a sudden, Sabrina is sitting on a bed of nails, wearing silk clothing and a silk red and gold turban. I have no idea what they were going for with this really strange pun, other than they were trying to make something happen so they could show magic in this scene, because we're at home and magic is very normal and we use it with jokes, we use it with chores, like whatever it is, magic is very present in Sabrina's home life. But I looked it up, I could not find what a fakir was except for one reference in a crossword puzzle from like 2013, and it's spelled Fakir. And I'm sorry, but that is a super big stretch. I don't know how they came up with this. And it's a little bit odd, but you know what? It's one of those things where it just shows that Hilda and Zelda have been all over the world in all times of the world. Sabrina says, this is a very painful pun, Aunt Hilda. And you know what? I have to agree with her. I don't want to sit on a bed of nails. Her aunts reassure her that Salem witch trials were way in the past, and honestly, the only thing that's happening in Salem is just expensive souvenirs and lots of like ridiculous costumes. And Sabrina's like, oh, well, then I can go. Okay, great. And it's funny because she was really worried about the whole witch hunt aspect. And I don't blame her. She is an actual witch. Going to Salem seems like we're asking for trouble. We arrive in the Salem Historic Village. The bus pulls up, and all the students are singing Beer on the Wall. Oh, God. I mean, I'm sorry, but that type of song is right up there with the Happy Birthday song. Nobody sounds good singing this, and it's mind-numbingly awful. Like, it just makes me want to die inside a little bit. And of course, our teacher is very done, and they only have a few more bottles of beer on the wall. And Harvey's very disappointed that they didn't finish the song because they've arrived. The teacher reminds them that ye be Puritans now, and that there's no more of that singing or talking about alcoholic beverages. And she hands everyone a card and says that one or more says witch. Everything else says townspeople. And it's up to you to either discover the witch or just continue on with your business. Harvey's card says townspeople, and Sabrina says that she's not even going to look at hers. Now, I do want to say that even though Sabrina is on this trip with her boyfriend and her best friend Jenny, she doesn't seem to be having a great attitude about it. And this is one of the few episodes where we see Sabrina really get into a grumpy teenage attitude. And that was super normal in the 90s, is that we embraced actual like hormonal moods where you would just be having a bad day and you're just like not feeling it. As Sabrina's best friend Jenny is getting off the bus, she gets stopped by our teacher saying that she's chewing gum and that is not a thing that Puritans had. And if it existed in their time, they would have been against it. Jenny spits out her gum in her card, which we see says townspeople, and tosses it away. Mr. Poole is here, our science teacher, and he is in the actual stocks waiting for them. And Sabrina jokes, what won't he do for money? Mr. Poole announces that there's a ye old inn where they will eat and sleep, and a meeting hall where they will discuss town's issues. And then he declares that everyone choose a buddy. Libby's lackeys both want to pick her, and she tells them to pick each other because she's going to go pick Adam. Sabrina and Harvey choose each other as buddies. And then we discover that Libby's crush asked Jenny to be his buddy. Oh, Libby, Adam already likes Jenny. Unthinkable. And then Mr. Poole says to Libby, because she's the only one without a buddy, I'll be your buddy. And she says, I feel like I'm falling down a well. The interesting thing about season 1 is that our episodes don't always only focus on Sabrina. We get a lot more of the other students, and Libby feels more like a secondary main character in a small way. We get a lot of like her plot, her story, her character arc, which is really interesting when the story is called Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Libby is most definitely just a regular person. Also, we're only going to see a little bit of our 90s fashion in this episode because we're all about to change into Puritan costumes. So the boys look like pilgrims dressed in black, navy, and brown, and our girls are wearing dresses with white collars and little bonnets. And just all of this clothing to me looks stuffy and thick and very hot. So my hope for them is that it was cold outside, so at least they weren't just really uncomfortable all day long. But I say that as someone who is usually just a little bit too warm in anything that I'm wearing. We get a small montage of everyone having to perform chores like the Puritans did, washing and brushing horses, churning butter, making candles by dipping wax over and over again. And Harvey and Adam are both upset that their shoulders are all sore and messed up, and that's really going to affect their game later on. At lunch, Jenny asks if anyone's been accused of being a witch yet, and Sabrina says no, and I hope no one has. Harvey asks her why, and she says, well, first you start looking for witches, and then it becomes a witch hunt. And you know what? She's not wrong. As soon as we decide that someone is an other or just a little bit different, mob mentality takes over, and suddenly we're all against this person for something that probably means nothing. We then cut to Libby's table where Mr. Poole, her buddy for the weekend, is joining her, and he asks how they're enjoying the weekend, and Libby says, if I wanted to do chores, I would have stayed home this weekend. She's not wrong, but it makes me wonder why this experience was chosen for the kids. Maybe because it was a close historical vantage point. I don't know. But I also hope that all of these kids are getting some kind of extra credit for taking a weekend out of their lives, especially with busy school lives and sports, extracurricular activities, to have an entire weekend where they're literally working. Mr. Poole says that, well, Puritan times were hard. I mean, a girl of your age would usually be married with a kid by now. And Libby and both of her lackeys all go, ew, all together. Then we cut back to Adam and Jenny, where Adam asks Jenny to talk to him outside in private. And she says, oh, private, that's forbidden. And he says, oh, no harm will come of it. Now, I want to say that we don't really see Adam's character return in the show, but I feel like he is so perfect for this episode because he's a little more theatrical in his acting than the rest of the characters. He really falls into this whole Puritan thing with the way that he talks and the way he moves, and he just seems a little more dramatic in his movements and acting choices. Libby sees her crush leave with Jenny and is very upset by this. She jumps up and says that she's going to do something about this. She's going to channel her anger into something productive. I also want to say that the blonde joins in and says that that's disgusting, seeing Jenny and Adam leave. Why? These are literally just two normal looking teenage people going to talk to each other. But it really just shows you how, like, these two lackeys don't have minds of their own. If Libby doesn't like something, they don't like something, and they're going all in. So it's no surprise that our future events in this episode transpire the way that they do. We then cut to Jenny and Adam talking outside. They're sitting on bales of hay. It's kind of adorable. And he asks her to keep what he's going to talk about with her a complete secret. And she says, of course I will. We go back into the dining hall where Harvey says he knows it's not appropriate to say, but she looks really cute in her outfit. And she goes, thanks. So do you. And then they start to hold hands. And our teacher goes, you're not allowed to hold hands until you're married. And Sabrina says, ye be really into this. Then we hear Libby cry out from the attic upstairs where the girls are supposed to sleep, and she claims that Jenny's specter flew up through the window and braided her hair to make her look dorky. Then she says that Jenny's specter threw her shoes out the window and makes them all run outside and shows them the proof that her shoes are on the floor because of Jenny's specter. And Sabrina is like, this is ridiculous. Why are you saying this? And Libby's like, I think Jenny's a witch. And Sabrina's like, no, she's not. And Mr. Poole and the other teacher both proclaimed that the Puritans would have taken these accusations very seriously. And as soon as they say that, the blonde lackey gets super excited. And she's like, I saw Jenny with the devil. Libby declares, I saw Jenny with the devil. And the other lackey, another African-American female, says, I saw Jenny with the devil. And then they all start chanting witch. Whoa. I just want to remind everyone, this is a family-friendly show from the 90s. Kids, preteens, teenagers, and possibly adults are all watching this. And we're talking about seeing someone with the devil. That was like, in my mind, I think it's super risque for the times. Even for right now, I think that's risque, but it's more normal now to talk about that sort of thing. But back then, oh my God, this is so serious. I mean, we know it's all just for play, but it still seems like a pretty serious accusation. Jenny comes up and is like, what's going on? And Libby points at her and says, witch. And Sabrina immediately takes her away up to the attic. And Jenny's like, I'm so confused. What's going on? Jenny thinks it's cool that she's accused of being a witch. And Sabrina is so upset. She's like, maybe in some circumstances, but what did your card say? And Jenny says that her card said townsperson, but that she threw her gum away in it. And Sabrina's like, that's what the wrapper is for. And she's so upset. And the teacher comes back upstairs and says it's time for a council meeting because Jenny's going on trial. Sabrina and Jenny go into the meeting hall. And as they do, Libby and her lackeys are standing on a raised platform and they all pretend that Jenny's specter is making them cold, cold. And Sabrina looks at them and says, oh, put a sweater on. And Jenny is put on the stand and Mr. Poole bangs the gavel and asks her if she confesses to being a witch. And Jenny says no. And he asks her, isn't it true that your specter braided Libby's hair and threw her shoes out the window? And Jenny says, no, I'm pretty sure my specter was with me the whole time. He asks her where she was when Libby screamed, and Libby immediately says she was with Adam, unescorted. And Mr. Poole says, how unseemly. And he asks her what they were talking about, and Jenny says that she can't say. Sabrina calls out, why don't we all try to figure out if that's Jill's real nose? And she points at the blonde lackey of Libby's, and Mr. Poole is like, calm down, this trial is not about Jill's nose. It's declared that if Jenny won't say what her and Adam were discussing, she'll be held in contempt. And she says she won't betray a trust. And they put her in the stocks. Like, oh my God. And then Sabrina sees Adam and she's like, I'll get him. And she runs over and says, you won't believe what happened. And he's like, oh my God, I was walking in the woods. And then he trots up onto the raised stock platform in this little hoppy leprechaun bounce. I'm telling you, this guy was made for character acting in different time periods. I love it. He declares that Jenny should not have to keep the secret. And she's like, no, I promised I wouldn't tell. And he's like, it's okay. They would have found out on Monday anyways. They go back into the trial room in the meeting hall, and he lets everyone know that he's quitting baseball. Harvey is extremely upset, and he stands up and says, you can't do this. And Adam is like, no, I just want to focus on my studies. And coach, he's insane. And Harvey's like, well, that's true. Libby proclaims that Jenny's a witch because she's turning a man against the sports. Her and her lackeys cower under the railing of the raised platform and keep chanting witch. And then Sabrina jumps up and does the whistle thing where you put your fingers in your mouth. Very impressive. And she says, you have no proof that she's a witch. And then all of a sudden, Libby turns on Sabrina, because of course she does. She claims that Sabrina is pinching her, and her lackeys join in, of course, as they always do. Libby points at Sabrina and declares that she is a witch, and Sabrina won't deny it because that really is who she is. And that would be really hard to say, no, I'm not, because she is a witch and she'd be lying, so that's a problem. Sabrina claims that the only witch in this room is you, and she points at Libby, and a huge golden ball of fire blasts around the room, and everyone has to duck, and Sabrina's panicked. Harvey says, what just happened? And Mr. Poole claims that it was some form of lightning, and how they're very lucky to witness this. It's such a rare form of science. The teachers both proclaim that tomorrow they will continue the trial of Sabrina. How exciting. Like, she says it with such a chipper demeanor, and Sabrina is like, I am dying. We cut to a scene with a split screen of Sabrina on one side and Hilda answering the phone at home. And Sabrina's like, I have to come home. You have to come get me. I'm in trouble. Hilda and Zelda leave their guests and say that Salem is in charge, which, dear God, Salem should never be put in charge of anything. He lets the power go right to his head. Sabrina and Harvey walk outside. She's back in her normal clothes. Harvey is trying to ask her to stay, and she says, sorry, it's just something about this town. I have to go. And then they kiss, and Harvey is very reluctant to pull away from the kiss, and he's like, please, come on, stay. And it's so sweet. Aunts pull up in a red convertible that looks suspiciously like the convertible from Third Rock from the Sun. Just saying. It's a very cool car, honestly. That type of car has been imprinted in my brain as the cool car of everything. I'm just saying. That and a Jeep. Dang it, Gilmore Girls. She explains to her aunts that there's a role-playing game going on and that she's been accused of being a witch. And she can't find her card that says that she's not a witch. But when she's put on the stand tomorrow, she also can't proclaim that she's not a witch because she is one, and that would be dishonest. And everyone is acting like being a witch is a bad thing. And I think it's in the sweetest moment where Zelda places her hand on her own heart and says, well, you know it's not. And Sabrina's like, well, I know that, but I can't make them understand it. And I was this close, and holds up her pointer finger, her spell finger, to blowing my cover. And Hilda says, well, this is new. Mortals have been accusing each other for years, but I think they finally accused a real witch for the first time. Hilda and Zelda explain to Sabrina that there's a lesson to be learned here. And Sabrina asks, what lesson? And they say it's accepting who you are. And she goes, well, I don't know what I am because I lost my card. And Hilda says, you don't need a card to tell you who you are. You already know. So they decide to leave. And I just want to give a quick little snippet. The reason why Sabrina lives with her aunts and not her own parents, she does actually have two parents. Her father is a witch, and her mother is what's referred to as a mortal. In this world, you're either a witch or a mortal or some other type of being. But a mortal usually means that you don't have any special powers or access to, quote unquote, the other realm, where all of the witch and fairy tale like creatures live. So her mother actually can't be in her presence, some kind of very strange thing. It's so confusing, but her parents are not together because they got divorced when she was young. And unfortunately, her mother can't be in Sabrina's presence or she turns into a candle. Who can say? We've got some really funny things that go on here, and that's one of the weirder, sadder, but also funny things all at the same time. The next morning, Harvey is churning butter as Sabrina sits beside him, and he's saying, "I'm really glad that you stayed." She's like, "Yeah, I guess so." And she says, "How could I miss doing chores and standing trial?" And then she turns to him a little more and says, "Harvey, could I ask you a question?" And he says, "About my feelings?" She says, "Yes." And he reluctantly lets go of the churning stick thing and says, "Well, okay." And so she asked him if he would still like her if she was a witch. And he goes, "Well, what does that mean?" She said, "Well, I guess it means you have supernatural powers." And he goes, "Oh, well, who wouldn't like that?" Stop it. This boy literally just told her he likes her for who she is, even though he doesn't know that's who she is. And they discuss all the things that she could do if she was a witch. And there's just not a whole lot. And it's just really funny that he's like, "Well, you could, huh, I guess there isn't that much that you could do." It's just so funny that, like, even when they talk about supernatural powers, it feels limited somehow in the things that you could make happen. Then they put Sabrina in a huge cart, and people are throwing lettuce and rotten food at her. Although I'm sure it's not actually rotten, because why would they have rotten food at a place like this? They walk back into they go back into the meeting hall, and as Sabrina walks by, Libby and her lackeys act like she's making them cold, and she's like, "Oh, can it?" Sabrina confesses to being a witch, and they're all confused because they're like, "Well, what does your card say?" She said, "Well, I don't know what I did with my card, so I guess I'm not a card-carrying witch." I think that's supposed to be a really funny 90s joke. Unfortunately, I was too young at the time as I watched this to get it then, and too much time has passed where I don't know if they're referencing a funny commercial, a certain brand of credit cards, but it's not funny now either. Oh well. It's one of those times when pop culture references in a TV show can get lost in the shuffle. Card shuffle. Oh my God. Anyways, moving on. Mr. Poole says that all she has to do is sign this confession and then they'll begin shunning her. And she's like, "Oh, okay." And starts to take the feather quill pen. And Harvey jumps up and is like, "Hey, that's not true. That was a false confession." And Sabrina says, "Harvey, I have no problem saying I'm a witch." And he says, "But it's not true at all. Look at this face. This is an adorable face. Witches are horrible, ugly faces." And Sabrina, of course, is a little bit offended by this. Then he says witches melt when you throw water on them. He grabs a tin cup and splashes her face. He says, "See, she's not melting." Then Sabrina says that what he's describing is a stereotype. And if we would only accept witches, then maybe there would be a witch among us who would actually proclaim themselves, but they're too worried because we're all going to judge them. But if we would just be a little more open-minded, maybe there would be a big pizza party right now. It's actually a really good little speech that she gives here, because if you replace the word witch with nerd or jock or anything, a different skin tone, a different ethnicity, a different way of living or believing, it basically comes down to let's all be a little kinder to one another. It doesn't mean that you have to understand what other people are all about, but you can kind of listen a little bit more and maybe not judge so quickly. She asked the court if they can accept witches, and they all say no and start chanting again. Mr. Poole bangs his gavel and says, "All right, all right. The buses will be here soon, and we all need to pass judgment on you and Jenny. Come forward." He asks the court to proclaim whether or not they think that Jenny has a witch card, and most of the court claps, and he declares that a final judgment on Jenny. And Jenny goes, "Oh man, is this going on my record?" Then he asks who thinks that Sabrina is a witch, and only Libby gets excited about that. Her lackeys don't join in on this point, which is interesting because they are reading the room and deciding that Libby is no longer in control here. Sabrina is basically upset that no one declares her a witch, and it's like, oh, they are definitely not getting a pizza party now. And Harvey is just looking down at her like, it's so cute that you're so upset. Everything is fine. You're not a witch. No one's going to accept that. And Libby is like, so how is Jenny going to be punished? And Mr. Poole is like, no one's going to be punished. This was all just a game. And Libby is beside herself and says that Jenny should be put in the stocks until the bus comes. Oh my God, Libby, just accept the fact that Adam is more interested in Jenny than he is in you. I know it sounds impossible, but it's true. Libby tries to continue acting like Jenny's specter is affecting her, saying that she's cold again, and looks at her lackeys, and they're both like, no, we're not. And then Sabrina points her pointer finger at Libby and really does make her feel cold for real. And she's shivering and shaking. And then Sabrina gives Libby a wet willy, and Libby freaks out and says, "No, I just had a wet willy. Oh my God." And the teacher is like, "Libby, this needs to stop. You're fine." And then Sabrina puts a tiny monkey on Libby's shoulder that only Libby can see and feel, and everyone else is like, "Oh my God, Libby, this has gone too far." And she's like, "No, I'm serious. I was faking before, but there really is a monkey." And Sabrina's like, "Oh, really? So you were faking? You falsely accused Jenny of being a witch?" And Libby's like, "Yes, yes, no, please. There's a monkey for real. He's wearing a little fez hat." And they dismiss court, declaring that Jenny is not a witch, just a regular person. And Libby is still freaking out about the monkey on her shoulder. Libby has been put into the stocks until the bus comes, so her and Mr. Poole are still dressed in their Puritan garb, while Sabrina and Harvey are dressed back in their regular clothes. And Harvey's looking very James Dean in his dark jeans and white t-shirt with his hair slicked back. Oh my goodness. And he's holding homemade butter for his mom that he churned himself, which is adorable. And Sabrina says that she got a kitchen witch for her aunts. Again, so cute. I love that we left this weekend with a good lesson, very heartwarming, and at the same time, we got some souvenirs. And Libby's in the stocks, which is fantastic. She says her nose itches, and Mr. Poole's like, "I got it for you, buddy." And she says she's hit an all new low. Our teacher brings this little adventure to a close by proclaiming that what they experienced here wasn't just a thing of the past. It is something that happens every day, that when someone is accused of being different, we all pile on top. And of course, Libby makes this funny by saying, "It wasn't just an idea that someone was different. There was a monkey on my shoulder." And they're all just like, "Oh my God." Harvey asks who had the witch card, and the teacher says, "No one had a witch card. Every single one said townsperson. I didn't create the witches. You did. I want you to think about that on the ride home." And when they get back in the bus, Harvey asks if they want to sing the beer bottle song again. And Sabrina is completely over it once more and says, "I think I'm just going to sleep the whole way home." And then she pulls out her card that she had left on the bus seat, opens it, and discovers that it says witch. And I do want to say it's in completely different script than the townsperson card that we saw Jenny have. So I feel like this is like a little bit of her own magic transforming her card to a witch card, because that's the accurate description of who she is. She's a witch. And you know what? That's okay. We cut to our end credits with our three witches in the kitchen, getting excited over the kitchen witch that Sabrina brought home. And Zelda says that she'll hang it over the cauldron. It's such a good little tidbit that their house is not like everyone else's. I want to point out Sabrina's fashion in this end credit scene. She's wearing a orange V-neck velvet shirt and just jeans, and her hair is up in a clip with like some shorter bangs parted on the side. Oh my God, it's so adorable. These are just like at-home clothes for her, nice and relaxed, but she still looks so chic and on point, and I desperately want that velvet shirt, although I think I would be sweating in it the whole time. It's so insanely cute. The three women are eating pies. Hilda asks Sabrina if she's glad she stayed. She says, "Yeah, I really learned my lesson." And the aunts have apparently already forgotten what that lesson was. And they're like, what is it? And she goes, the lesson. Then they decide they want more pie. And Sabrina's like, oh no, I got it. And she uses her little pointer finger to bring the pie off the kitchen island counter to the kitchen table. And Sabrina says that she feels so much better that she can just be at home and be completely herself. Oh, I love that so much. First of all, that Sabrina has a place that she can go home to and feel like herself, and that she has two loving aunts that rescue her, but also are willing to make sure that she learns a lesson that grows her as a person, but doesn't put her in danger at the same time. The aunts knew that nothing truly bad could happen because, of course, she was not going to be hung or burned at the stake or anything like that. She was not going to be punished. She's a high school student on just a fun themed trip, and she came home feeling better than when she left. I give this episode 9 out of 10 jars of churned butter, freshly churned by Harvey Kinkle himself. I would die if Harvey Kinkle churned butter just for me. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm in love with him. It's not my fault, okay? I saw this show when I was very young, in my years of when I fell in love with Will Smith on Fresh Prince, Harvey on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Corey Matthews on Boy Meets World. This is not my fault. This is what the 90s gave to me, okay? I sincerely hope you have enjoyed this shorter episode of Let's Rewatch It Again. If you have any requests, comments, questions, or anything else you would like to send to me at my email at letsrewatchitagain@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Let's Rewatch It Again. So until next time, I'll catch you on the flippity flip.